Hello, I'm Alexandra Chandler. I'm running to be your next member of Congress because, in modesty, I believe I'm the best candidate in this race to actually get things done in Washington for working and middle-class people. I believe this because I had 13 years of experience in the intelligence community tackling some of the toughest problems that this country and this planet faces, including the spread of weapons of mass destruction technology from countries like North Korea and the Iranian nuclear program. In that experience, I got to see Americans of all groups coming together to tackle these problems. And I saw that as an analyst and a leader of analysts, working with people across the country, departments of government, and under multiple administrations, including President Bush and President Obama, and briefly President Trump. I also offer unique experience in this race. I'm the only candidate who has directly worked in national security. I'm a Russian-speaking lawyer and former intelligence analyst that can serve as a check on the recklessness of this administration and to defend our democracy at home. I also have specific experience in community health care, having been the director of a community health center where I helped lower costs and raise quality. I am a working mom. I understand what it's like to balance daycare costs and student loans. I've had the experience of a dad who struggled with addiction and it contributed to his death. I understand your challenges. I've lived these challenges. I offer a comprehensive, progressive plan on how to deal with them. You can find them on my website, alexandrachandler.com. I'm running because I see this as answering a call to serve. I will be your representative, not that of big money or ultra-wealthy donors. And I will always remember, as a middle-class mom, the challenges that you and your family face. Thank you so very much, and I look forward to earning your support. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the Sun, Alexandra, for our continuing series of Sun Edit Boards with candidates for the 3rd Congressional District. I think you're our 5th or 6th now. We're almost at the halfway point. Whew.
Halfway a third if we keep going this way.
So we'll give you a few minutes to introduce yourself, and then we'll have some questions. We'll go about an hour, and everything will be on the record unless you request to go off the record. I hope you don't. I don't see any reason for doing that. So Alexandra, take it away. The floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for having me. I'm Alexandra. You can call me Alex as well. I'm running for Congress because I think, in modesty, I'm the best person to get things done for the working middle-class people of the district. It's that simple. And that's because of my professional experience in the intelligence community, 13 years having joined after 9/11. Then it's my specific expertise that the country needs right now. I'm the only candidate in the race who's directly worked in national security, the only candidate that has direct experience in community health care. And I think that those things are very important at this moment, with everything from defending our democracy to our foreign policy and America's standing in the world. And then finally, I'm a working middle-class mom. I've got 2 kids, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. I've had to juggle the daycare costs and the student loans. I've got parents that aren't getting any younger. And in my own family growing up, we had to deal with addiction, with my birth father who struggled with alcohol, then prescription drugs, non-prescription drugs that contributed to his death. So I can bring the realities of those issues to Congress, unique expertise, and that's why I am answering this call to serve.
So you're answering a call.
That's the way I see it, insofar as I joined the intelligence community after 9/11 because I lived...
Can you elaborate on that?
Please, yes.
I find that fascinating, the intelligence community. What exactly did you join following 9/11, and what was that all about?
I joined the Office of Naval Intelligence. So what happened specifically was I had been living in New York City going to law school, and my high school sweetheart, then girlfriend, now wife, other mom of my 2 kids, was in a subway train under Lower Manhattan when the towers came down. And I paced our little Brooklyn studio apartment for 3 hours not knowing if she was alive or dead. I am not ashamed to say I cried, I screamed, I looked up at God, I begged, because it was also the 7th anniversary of my father's death. And I made a promise that if she came out okay, I would serve in some fashion. And joining the intelligence community was my way of repaying that debt, because it was 3 hours later she called me from a payphone and said that she was okay. She walked home across the Manhattan Bridge, covered in dust. Our neighborhood smelled like jet fuel for months as a constant reminder to me. So I apply to, as I say, agencies with acronyms. And
is it NCIS, just like TV?
no, you know, it's disappointing. It's more kind of dusty cubes and stuff like that. Though there's a part of NCIS that was sort of down the hall from me at No and I.
Not to belittle yours.
No. I have much more humorous anecdotes to share from Intel World. But I applied to agencies, and the Office of Naval Intelligence made me an offer to work in counterproliferation. And what that is working to combat the smuggling of weapons of mass destruction related materials from countries like North Korea, combating the nuclear programs of countries like Iran, and stopping the transfer of weapons into conflict zones. So over my tenure, that included Libya, Syria, Yemen. Incredibly fulfilling work, incredibly rewarding work, and is salient to this race, work that taught me what is possible when you bring Americans of all sorts together. Because this is military intelligence. This is inherently a conservative organization in many ways, particularly back in 2004 once I got through the security clearance process. Yet, we came together for a greater purpose and mission. There's no room for yelling and political posturing. You just got to get the mission done. And I joined under the Bush administration. I worked with Bush political appointees, with those multiple agencies. I worked with Congress in response to congressional inquiries, and I did that under Bush, I did that under Obama, and I briefly did that under Trump. So I want to take the can-do attitude from that and the experiences that I learned, including, and I'm sure we'll go into this more, the fact that I transitioned gender while working in the Office of Naval Intelligence in 2006. And I found from that such gratitude and optimism for what your fellow Americans really are once they get to know people on a personal level, and then what we can achieve. Because it was after that, I was promoted multiple times, and by the time I was done, I was the division chief running that entire analytical mission for the intelligence community. So it propels me forward to this day, this belief.
But you know, we've heard a similar call from some of the other candidates in the race that they want to go to Washington and try to unite everyone.
Right.
And you know, work across the aisle, yada yada yada. What makes you think that you'd be successful? It seems that the aisles right now are so far apart that, you know, even a mass shooting in Florida where 17 kids were killed. You know, we hear all these all these measures to try to get at that, but no one's talking about, you know, trying to sever relationships with the NRA and really tighten up gun controls. What makes you think that you could do that?
It's because, in modesty, I have done it, in part, in that I'll give you an example. When it came time for me to hire a deputy division chief to do that job with me, the one I hired, he sent all of his kids, well, no, 2 of his kids, to Liberty University, which I don't know if you're familiar, in a very, very, very conservative religious institution.
I was going to guess.
Yes, exactly. And yet we worked hand in hand for 5 years on this mission. And what I'll tell you is that I have so much experience working across government to get things done in the counterproliferation realm. But then beyond that, it's that I even had to work with other governments. And remember, I'm doing this all as a transgender lesbian woman in a very male-dominated environment, a very conservative environment. I have experience working with people that are not at all like me for years and years, and not only working together, but thriving. And it's that I believe does set me apart as someone who has some actual experience there. And because, frankly, the national security experience, when it comes to Republicans, I have to tell you, and this is an amusing and sad commentary for me, when I go around the district and I first talk about my national security experience and everything, people will often presume that I am running as a Republican. And then I have to say, what part of raise the minimum wage and universal health care and combating climate change did you not hear? But people hear about service and they hear about national security and they make certain assumptions.
Right, let's hit on some of those issues. Tom?
Yeah.
Jim Campanini, the editor, who couldn't be here today, he's asked every candidate this question. You're in the room with the president a few weeks back. and you're offered the wall for the Dreamers. Is that a deal you take?
I take the deal. I take the deal, and here's why. Because
You're the second person now who would take the deal.
here's why I take the deal. Because the Dreamers are under threat now. Their lives, in some cases, because of the places they might go back to, are on the line now. The wall is a ridiculous waste of resources. This government has wasted a lot of money on a lot of different things over time. I would rather keep the Dreamers safe and honor our values, and then we can turn off the funding for the wall later. That's the way that I would approach the issue. And candidly, in politics you have to make tough choices. And it's a matter of triage. It's a matter of what's most important. And that's how I would order that hierarchy of values in my head. Wasting those resources is repugnant to me, but the Dreamers are more important. And those that are under TPS, let's not forget them either.
Case follow-up. We're talking about immigration, border security, that type of thing. What's the solution for the 11 million? It's another throw around people who are here without status right now. And I want to parse the question a little because 5 million of those are people who show state visas. So is there one size fits all? Are there different solutions? I mean, how would you approach that if you went to Washington?
It's not quite one size fits all, but it's close to it. In that one of the problems with our immigration system today is that there are something like 180 different types of visas. And this is partially because of treaties that we have with other countries. But we have made this unduly complicated. We have made compliance unduly complicated, unduly expensive, and without direct benefits to either our economy or national security. So as I would approach the issue, we need to simplify this greatly. And then when it comes to the 11 million, I say we cannot have a permanent class of people living in this country who are in the shadows. I would be in favor of a path to citizenship for the entire population. It's a path. It's not a guarantee. Ask anyone who's been through the process, and I would say the process being the regular process that a permanent resident from a country that we have no particular visa barriers or positive preferences with goes through. And that is what I would offer, with all of the wickets of national security checks and checks for any violent crime along the way that we would have for anyone else. That is, to my mind, the end solution to this.
Chris?
Sure. Can you speak a little bit about your views on healthcare? Off the top of my head, I can't remember if you were one of the candidates at the Hudson Forum who actually got to answer that question.
I don't think so.
3 or 4 of them. So we'd love to hear your stance on whether you're in favor of a single-payer system or more on the side of existing fixes to the existing Affordable Care Act.
I'm in favor of a single-payer system, and I will explain why. I have mentioned that I've experience in community health care and what that teaches, and specifically, I was a director of a not-for-profit community health center for 5 years, a member of the board of directors. And what we did over 5 years was to lower costs and raise quality, get favorable reimbursement rates, all of that, that improved the healthcare experience greatly for patients. And we have 16,000 a year by the time we were done. It also tells me the limits of what can be done in the current system. And the doctors and the nurses that I worked with would be the greatest advocates for this. Insofar as when you have the profit motive embedded in so many nodes in the system, you inherently reach a barrier of what you can achieve. Now, when I talk about single payer, we will still have competition as providers that are getting reimbursed from the single payer of the government are still competing for patients, but they're competing largely on quality. And what I see in this debate that is often missing is people just go for the headline, Medicare for all, single payer, done. It's not that simple. And that's where I go into some detail on my website and see it if anyone's watching this. You can look at the healthcare section. There are programs specifically under Medicaid currently for people living with disabilities, for senior citizens, particularly nursing care for seniors. We have to make sure those migrate over. We have to look at the reimbursement rates for Medicare to make sure that we don't drive too many providers out of business. We need to do all of that in a gradual transition, and that is what I'm in favor of. And I would also say that in the long run, it will be economically good for this country, particularly for small business. Because right now, you either have to run a benefits department or contract that out to people. And a small business is in a difficult enough situation in many cases today. To take this burden away, where it's simply everyone has access to this program, I think that will be a great boon for small business over time.
All set, Chris?
Yes, I don't know.
So this would be a good segue into a couple of other issues. Talking about small business, would you have voted for the tax reduction that Trump pushed through Congress?
Tax reduction.
Well, the tax package.
Tax scam. I would vote yes. No, I would not vote for it.
I mean, the government's been out there touting how it's done all this. You know, businesses are hiring, and businesses are giving dividends and all that. You don't believe it?
The corporations, public relations offices, and firms are earning their pay. No, these are. I recognize that there can be one-time benefits. I'm looking, as some have said before me, to help build an economy that is built to last in the longer run. And I look at this, first and foremost, it's fiscal responsibility. I have 2 kids. This is generating over $1 trillion in new debt. And that is just appalling to me. And if you're going to drive economic growth, any economist will, 99% of economists will tell you, get more money in the hands of working middle-class people that'll spend it immediately. Now, this has some short-term benefits there, but in the 10-year look at this, because I like to look at things in a long-term view, you see that purchasing power and take-home pay of so many Americans will actually go down with this package. Meanwhile, our debt will go up. It was an irresponsible act, and I would look forward in the next Congress to repealing the overwhelming majority of it.
In all fairness, the party out of power always talks about fiscal responsibility. So, I mean, the debt that's gotten here today
Indeed.
is bipartisan. Probably one thing both sides can
Yeah, I was
agree
going to say, that is a bipartisan achievement,
Right.
this massive debt. I couldn't agree more.
So how do you fix it?
Some unpopular things, and I'm ready to talk about them. We need to go back to the Clinton era tax rates. We need to repeal corporate tax breaks that incentivize corporations to do things like conversions with minor entities abroad that then they can use for tax purposes to keep hundreds of billions of profits over there. It is not a single silver bullet that solves this. It is both of those things. And then on top of that, what I would also offer up is this. We have, over the last few decades, migrated from an industrial economy towards a service economy. We're moving towards being an automation economy. And so much of our economy currently, and over the last decade or so, has been in financial services specifically. I would be in favor of something that a lot of countries have adopted, and we ourselves have at a small level, which is a very small financial transaction tax, which that alone could raise us at a 0.025% rate, I believe. And you can look for the details on our website, and I would do it differently for securities transactions versus mutual funds versus other investments. You're talking $125 to $200 billion a year right there. So a combination of these things gets us to a place where even if we are still incurring deficits, we are not incurring a higher debt as a level of our GDP. We are stabilized, and that's where we need to be.
So elaborate on a financial transaction tax.
Yes.
You know, there's the capital gains tax now. Would it replace that?
No, what this would be is that, and when I talk about something that we already do, the SEC has a small fee that it charges for all securities transactions currently. It's part of how they fund their operations. People generally don't even know that it's there because it's simply a cost of doing business. And it's something like a few hundredths of a percent. I would simply add this on top of that. And when I'm talking about what it would be, we're talking 0.025, 0.05. This is not something that's going to hurt margins or retirement investments for ordinary citizens. The only thing that this will trim is the margins of investment firms that simply live on day trading. And that alone, though, can do a good bit to bring down our deficit. And the fact is, this wasn't an industry that really even existed 15, 20 years ago, this volume of financial trade. And our tax system simply has to catch up with that. We have to go where some of the revenue is, and we just haven't. And the reason for that is, as it so often is, money in politics. Because what I offer here helps ordinary people by funding their government, the resources that clearly people want and the services people want, and it doesn't hurt them. And the revenue is there to be had, but the investment firms certainly have a lobby that's on their side and very active, which is why you've never seen it.
Okay. Chris?
I'm just wondering if you can just be really specific on this, because even for me, and I imagine a lot of voters, the financial industry is kind of nebulous and hard to understand. When you say financial transactions, specifically, what would that apply to? And would average residents even see that in their own transactions, or would this just be for stock trades or security trades done by large companies?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, is a tax on stock and security trades. So the average citizen who has a 401k or an IRA, you'd probably never even notice it was there, because your funds are comprised of subsidiary investments that then your investment firm is making trades on. You would see nothing in your statement to reflect any of this, because any impact would be negligible. Where this really is reflected is on the big investment firms making huge day trades day by day by day. 99% of citizens wouldn't even notice this.
Sure. Just
Wouldn't
wanted
impact them at all.
to have you kind of parse that down. I think this is a good transition to something else I wanted
Please.
to ask about. Just could you talk a little bit about the pledge or contract you signed regarding campaign finance? I know that you made that a big point of your campaign. Why do you see that as so important?
Because it unlocks so much of what the American people clearly want their government to do. And yet the government has been woefully unresponsive. And I'll say, this isn't something that's just since Donald Trump was elected or since there's been a Republican Congress. This has been a persistent problem that's just worsened over time. Whether it's gun safety and the NRA and the power of an organization that's very singularly focused with a good bit of money to invest in key races and with key influencers to stop things that 90% of the people want, or whether it's things like paid family leave that, again, large majorities of Americans want, and at the federal level, but certain lobbyists, certain business groups do not want it, so it doesn't happen. And this happens on issue after issue. So to me, it's part of unlocking the political system that people talk about it being rigged against ordinary people. This is where that happens. But then the other part of it is this. It also will set politicians, and in modesty candidates too, free to be able to spend more time on policy, more time actually working together. My goodness.
Raising money.
Right, my goodness. If our members of Congress could take the 4 hours a day that they're spending on the phone calling donors and instead sitting down with their counterparts from the other side and actually hashing things out, I think that our country would be much better off. And I think that most members of Congress, if administered truth serum, will agree with this point.
Alex, you're from Haverhill, right?
Yes, I live in Haverhill, yes.
You live in Haverhill
Yes,
now?
yes, and my parents live there.
Okay.
So we have, my mom is Italian, so Italian family. We've got my kids, us, my parents. It's a great speaking of childcare, it's a great childcare.
So the Sun has a story on page 1 today about legislation pending before the state legislature where Massachusetts would become a safe state. So what is your view on that legislation, but more broadly the whole sanctuary city?
You mean the Safe Communities Act? Yeah, I'm supportive because the way that I see it is it's public safety first and foremost. If members of immigrant communities do not feel that they can interact with law enforcement without a threat of deportation or other consequences on their head, what does that do to the crime in our neighborhoods? I mean, you have a certain population of people that will be witnesses to crimes, victims of crimes, that will not feel that they're able to come forward. So, to me, it's a very simple issue that way.
Are you comfortable with some of the changes that have been made in the bill to get law enforcement on board?
What would you like? What would you like to highlight specifically?
Specifically, the amount of time that someone can be held, under suspicion. I think it went from 48
6 hours.
It went from 48 to 6, for example.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but as I've spoken of before, politics is about compromise. And I would be supportive of the legislation writ large, even with that compromise in there.
Can we circle back? I just have a quick aside going back to the campaign finance. I remember you saying with the pledge you agreed to support public funding of elections.
Yes.
As briefly as you want to keep it, what do you think that should look like, talking specific numbers or where that money should come from and how that should be administered?
Yes. I would say that it's a combination of money, it's a combination of immediate access. I think that we still need to have citizens be able to get information, TV, radio, print, digitally.
Hopefully
that
for a few more
tells
years.
people, yes, that tells people what the candidates are offering to them. So it's a combination of financing and access to the airwaves and other media to do that. And that should come out of the Treasury because it's, to me, modest investment there. I mean, we are spending billions per election cycle on fundraising. If we instead spent, say, half of that or a quarter of that from a publicly centered approach, giving candidates equal access to speak to the public, I think it would be money well spent. And then I'll say, in terms of the mechanism to do this, I have no illusions. The Supreme Court decided Citizens United. This will most likely, in the end, require a constitutional amendment to actually get this done. And I would be supportive of that effort. I would try first with statute, but I imagine that will get challenged. And we'd carefully craft it to try to survive Supreme Court challenge, but in the end it will likely have to be a constitutional amendment.
Alex,
Could I go back?
Yes.
I just want to get your response to something when we're talking about campaign finance. There was a town hall in Florida last night with Senators Rubio and Nelson. And I don't know if you saw it, but there was a young man who pushed Senator Rubio on accepting donations from the NRA. I wanted to get your response to his response, which was, it's not so much that I'm being given money to do something. I'm being given money because I support this position already, and they're just supporting me.
Don't buy it.
Okay.
Don't buy it. And I'll say, it corrupts us all. It corrupts us all and it distorts all of our politics. Because even the politicians that come in with the best intentions, the candidates that come in with the best intentions, if you are spending most of your time on the phone or in interactions with people that are either single-mindedly focused on a single issue or are so much more wealthy and have so much more power than the average American, it will distort your impressions of what is important over time. It's simple human psychology. And anyone that doesn't admit that is perhaps fooling themselves.
So I think we're onto a thread here. Staying with campaign finance,
Please.
you know, some of the heavy hitters in this race have raised a lot of money. They also happen to be the candidates in this race who moved into the district to run.
Yes.
Okay, you know, they're not born and raised in the district like you are, and like some of the other ones, some of the other candidates. So couple those two things together: moving into the district to run, and then raising millions and millions, much of it out of the district. What's your reaction to that, or do you have any thoughts about that? Do you find that repulsive? I think you used the word earlier, repugnant. Do you find that repugnant?
Well, let me backtrack correction, because I was born in New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh no, that's
I live here
no.
now.
Look, you
So,
live in
yeah,
Haverhill now. You live in the district.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
we don't need to
yeah.
go that far.
But no, but I tell the truth.
You didn't move to
Yes.
Haverhill to run for this seat.
No. I announced in Facebook official
Right.
in June that, hey, I'm leaving government. I'm done.
Yeah.
All that.
So
Yeah. So.
okay. Let it
I
go on the
believe,
table, Alex.
no. I want to say this the right way. Having talked to all of the people running, because we see each other on the circuit again and again and again. Yes, I believe everyone believes they are in this for the right reasons, and that they too are answering a call to serve in their own way. I believe that at the bottom of my heart. I do. But I will say, and I turn this right back at me because I have to make the same phone calls too. And I believe that as we move forward into another year of this administration over time, I think that you're going to see more and more people that are interested in service in different ways, whether in the military, in the intelligence community, candidates for office, because they see the power of those institutions in motion right now. This is part of why in my platform, I call for a very expanded voluntary national service program, because I think that we've lost something over time in terms of common experiences of our citizenry in working on a mission with a higher purpose, because it can bring people together of different backgrounds. And that then, if you do that, and that becomes something that is just, it's not mandatory, but it's part of just what happens in society. Oh, you finish high school. Okay, where are you going to do your service year? And that just becomes something that is done. I think that then you'll have a generation that grows up knowing people from different places in the country, people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, and then that will over time build a better civil society, a better politics. And that's kind of the lessons that I draw out of my intelligence community time. Now back to the specific work that I did. I talked about the fact that we were combating the spread of weapons of mass destruction technologies, arms going to conflict zones. I'm very humbled to say that I wrote analysis and led analysts in preparing analysis for the President's Daily Brief on many occasions under multiple administrations. So it's given me insights as to what the very tough decisions that are made in that Oval Office. I'll also say that I've had the honor of leading intelligence delegations abroad, including to some very sensitive parts of the world. I've flown across the world to go onto an aircraft carrier and brief a Navy admiral on North Korea and other issues. So it gives me an appreciation of both the challenges and the opportunities that the US has from a security perspective, a diplomatic perspective. And I think that given a lot of the recklessness in this administration, that kind of experience is so vital to have in Congress, for Congress to resume its constitutional role. And I think that this is a place where I could make great common cause, particularly with some of the more libertarian-minded Republicans. Because one of the things I would look to do is repeal and replace the authorization for use of military
Before
force.
you get onto that,
Yeah.
I want to
Please.
interrupt you here. Speaking of Congress, We've tried to be consistent in asking the candidates several questions about
Please.
healthcare, safe cities. This is another one of those questions that we're trying to get everybody on. If you're elected, and say the Democrats take back the House, who should be the House Speaker? Should it be Nancy Pelosi again, or should it be someone like the fellow, I think it was from somewhere in the upper Midwest, that Seth Moulton was trying to run as a replacement for Nancy Pelosi?
I support Nancy Pelosi. I believe that we need to keep our eye on the ball. And right now, the issues for the security of this country, defending our democracy, and such as we can get things done to actually help working and middle class people, that needs to be at the forefront, not, internal political discussions as to who should be in what leadership role. There will be a time for new leadership, don't get me wrong, but I think that the imperatives of what we must do now are so important that I would be supporting it.
It's interesting because most, I think, of the other candidates have seen that issue just like you, to retain Speaker Pelosi or Minority Leader Pelosi.
I'm hoping for Speaker Pelosi.
Yeah.
Yes.
And listen, I have to fly. It's nice meeting you. Good luck.
Good to meet you.
You're in good hands with my colleagues.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right, I'm sliding to the
Yep.
spot here. Let's talk about Second Amendment stuff. Considering everything that's happened, Congress has been very inactive on these things, and if you would go up there and the Democrats were to have taken power come 2019, what are the moves you think they should be making on gun issues?
I have a whole list of these on the website in case I miss any that I share here, but I think you start with where you can get a lot of common ground. Enhancing universal background checks is a big one. And what that means specifically is the flow of data into background check systems, whereby we will see if, say, the military has judged someone to be unsafe to carry weapons because of either dishonorable discharge or other conduct within the Code of Military Justice, convictions for domestic abuse, other issues that have come up that can serve as red flags. I would support that. I would support psychological screening as part of the process of a first-time purchaser of a gun. I would support a waiting period because, to me, these are simple solutions to implement that can really do a lot to stem the problem of impulse purchase and then impulse decision to commit a terrible act, and gives us time for other interventions to take place. So those are among the first things. But then what I would also do is I would support a restoration of the federal assault weapons ban. And I say that because though I support the Second Amendment, the assault weapons ban was previously ruled constitutional, which is why it was in place for over a decade. While an assault weapons ban will not deal with what is already out there in terms of millions of semi-automatic weapons with assault-grade, military-grade technology, it can at least stem that tide in the future. So I would also support that. I would support a massive increase in federal support to local and state buyback programs because of the issue I just brought up, which is we have millions of such weapons in circulation now. And I think that we're seeing media reports of this and tweets about this left and right. People who have semi-automatic weapons with military-grade technology that people are turning in, breaking up, saying, you know what, I don't want to be part of this problem even inadvertently. Someone breaks into my house or my kid somehow gets this weapon. I want to enable that with policy and legislation.
Yeah, I think I saw one where somebody took a circular saw to their AR-15.
Yeah, and what I would come to with all of this is I worked for the military for 13 years. I worked for people and with people who owned guns, who were responsible gun owners, doing all the things that we would want responsible gun owners to do. And I support the Second Amendment. I think that these are matters of regulation and safety that we apply in so many other spheres of life. And I have to say, I come at this from a personal perspective in two ways. One, I had, very briefly, the nightmare experience of getting the phone call. The phone call at work. I was in the Pentagon when I got a call. It was a robocall from my son's then school because there had been a shooting incident across the street. The wording was poor, so that I was told first that the school was on lockdown and that it was a shooting, then that it was across the street. I don't have to tell you that my heart skipped several beats. And though I was sitting in the Pentagon, the bastion of American military power, I have never felt, and this includes 9/11, more helpless than I did at that moment. And that will animate me as an advocate for these policies. And then also, frankly, I spent over a decade fighting the flow of weapons of war going into conflict zones abroad and killing people in other countries. We deny the ATFE and the FBI the tools that they could be using to track and trace the smuggling of guns across state lines in this country. We do that because the NRA has purchased that restriction. So, as a member of Congress, I'll fight to ensure that the facilities and the offices that are looking at that aren't relying on paper records as they are now, but have electronic records and the ability to share information just as we do in the intelligence community to properly deal with this problem. This is how I approach the issue.
Should we lift the ban on actually tracking, like studying gun deaths?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the one that I don't get.
Oh yes, and as I mentioned, I believe on the website, it's also about public health. Tens of thousands of gun deaths by suicide, because we get the headlines of these mass shootings, and as a mother, they break my heart. But let's not forget that every day what's happening are Americans in crisis using a gun to end their lives. And then all the people, and it's a lot of poorer people and people of color, that don't make the headlines, that are dying in our towns and our cities every day. And we need to study every possible solution to stem that public health emergency. Because if you look at certain groups of people, it's the leading cause of death in this country.
Chris?
Sorry, I'm just taking some notes. I want to check back and make sure. I don't have anything else on my list.
I have so many other things we can talk about.
Okay, no, actually, you mentioned in your opening climate change.
Yes.
What are your ideas?
I am a believer in using the power of the federal government to move us to a sustainable, renewable-based economy. And I see this not just as combating a problem that is upon us, but as an incredible opportunity, because we have, and this goes right down to this district, we have the combination of an educated workforce, skills when it comes to manufacturing, particularly in aerospace technologies and other areas, where if you look at the potential of solar farms over hundreds of square miles in the Southwest, what we could do in the Commonwealth when it comes to wind farms off our coast, what we could do with geothermal. We have an entire industry where we led when it comes to Lowell, when it comes to Haverhill, the Industrial Revolution. We could be leaders in this revolution for this planet in this century if we just get ourselves to the table. And the federal government has the power through a variety of means to foster that. We need to make tax credits for things like solar installations. I had solar panels on my old house. Make those permanent. We need to provide renewable industry the same kind of subsidies that we keep throwing at oil and gas despite their profits. We need to stop doubling down on new investments when it comes to pipelines and offshore drilling that is just going to exacerbate our long-term climate problems while not creating the kind of jobs that are on offer otherwise. And Massachusetts is a leader already when it comes to renewables. So we have more to gain than almost anyone else. And specifically, I would say I support a bill before Congress which through a variety of targets, tax credits, carbon tax, and other things to move us to the goal of a 100% renewable economy by 2050, which I will say, that is a bold goal, but I believe in bold goals. And we start from there, and if we have to make compromises, we make them. But I believe in that clarity, and I believe in framing it as opportunity, because I see it as such. And I also, something that doesn't come up, I'll say, I happen to be a person of faith, I'm a Catholic, and I view this as stewardship. I view it as stewardship, and I view it also as a mother. I have kids that, God willing, will see 2100, and I want it to be on a planet that they can live on.
You mentioned oil and gas subsidies. Any other subsidies we should get rid of?
Let's see. On the agricultural side, I would say that we are still doing too much to support large-scale agribusiness. I'm much more in favor of targeted support to small community farms, of which we have some in our district. That's the one that comes to mind other than oil and gas. And I would say, in terms of investments, subsidies, where the government is getting it wrong, I would say, look at how we handle highways and public transit. We have a gas tax that has not been moved for decades. And when we look at infrastructure, there are a lot of proposals out there right now where, oh, we're going to repair that stretch of highway, and then we're going to throw a big toll on it, which is so regressive to the people that can afford it least. If you do something like a very light nudging of the gas tax at a point where, if you look back over the last decade or so, gasoline prices are lower, this is the time to do it, and then index that to inflation so that we can make a steady investment in both repairing the roads that need to be repaired and then investing in new infrastructure to actually get people moving. Because my goodness, you drive around this district, it takes an hour to get anywhere. I mean, is what it really comes down to, at least, depending on the state of the traffic. And there's a reason for that.
Sort of broadly speaking, you've made a couple of suggestions here for sustainable initiatives, but it seems like you've proposed a lot of progressive policies that would require additional federal investment or a shuffling of federal resources. The way the government currently operates, where do you think the most resources should be drawn from? What do you think the government funds or pays for or does right now that is a misapplication of tax dollars, and how would you suggest reducing that and applying it to other things?
I would slow the growth of defense. And I say that as someone who believes in the U.S. military and U.S. foreign policy as a tool for good in the world. But I associate myself with the remarks of Secretary Mattis once upon a time that our underinvestment in diplomacy, and I would also say development, have created and are creating more problems for the U.S. military to solve. So what I would do is move growth funds out of defense. We just received a ballooning of the defense budget in the last bill that passed, bringing it up to over $700 billion that I believe is excessive. And I would look to a, not cut, but probably a no-growth posture for the Department of Defense. And the way that I would achieve that is by, as we were briefly touching on earlier, I would look to repeal and replace the authorization for use of military force. Because we have the US military stretched in so many conflicts around the world where we don't have a clear strategy for victory or what even tactical success looks like. And I understand that more than many. I think I could be an effective advocate in Congress to say, we need to make tough choices. We need to say that, say, the F-35 program has cost overruns that are simply unacceptable, and we need to pare back the orders because of that. We need to look at our procurement processes and do better. And I think that there, if you look particularly in a 10-year time frame, there's hundreds of billions of dollars to be had there. And that you can invest a tenth of that in diplomacy and then ensure that you can then achieve the national security mission with a lower growth defense budget. And then the other part of this is I would say that it's the revenue side needs to be addressed. And that's where I am intellectually honest in the fiscal responsibility plank of my platform. I say, here's where we're going to draw at least several hundred billion here. Here is where we're going to draw more here, because I believe that any investments that I call for must be paid for, and beyond hand-waving or beyond, well, it's going to increase economic growth. That is not an intellectually honest answer to citizens.
How much of the growth in the military do you think is the military itself wanting the latest and best? And how much of it do you think it is members of Congress who have defense contractors in their districts?
It's a lot more column B. I'll say, I work specifically for naval intelligence, and sadly we've read many stories of Navy crews having been pushed to the limit with ridiculous hours on ships that don't have the proper maintenance, haven't had the proper parts for far too long. Yet, it's always best for a member of Congress to be able to take that big scissor and open up a new wing of a plant or something like that. Whereas more operation and maintenance funds for a Navy destroyer is not as glamorous.
Maintenance is never sexy.
That's right.
Chris?
I think I've gone through just about everything I have.
Okay, we have a few minutes left in your hour. I'm going to let you speak on one issue that we haven't touched.
Sure. I don't think we've talked enough about underemployment. And I say underemployment because within this district, as with Massachusetts or largely in the country, people have jobs by and large, but they're not jobs that actually allow them, in far too many cases, to take care of themselves, to take care of their family, let alone put anything by for the future, afford a vacation once a year or something like that. And far too many people are just one emergency away from being economically wiped out. Only a few $100s in savings, if that. So a lot of what I want to do is address that. And the way that I would do it is a few things. We do need to raise the minimum wage, but that's not just about helping workers at the bottom. That will cause wage inflation further up the scale, and I think that's critically important for people to understand. I want federal support to apprenticeships. A bunch of states do this. Sadly, Massachusetts does not. But we need at the federal level to support businesses of all sizes for offering a combination of work experience and education to people that can then help people at varying levels, times in their career, to move into new industries and sectors when that's what's needed. I would also support an expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, something that Barack Obama and Paul Ryan have both supported at different times. Why we haven't done that is beyond me. So that's something else I would make a priority. And I think that what's wrapped into this is education at all stages of life. And people talk about no-cost community college, no-cost college and universities. I support that and federal incentives and subsidies to make that happen. But what also needs to happen is targeted investments in transportation and childcare to make that a reality, and conditioning such funds on community colleges and others, offering courses and programs that meet people's needs where they are. it's useless to offer a certificate program or training when people already have a job, to offer it only during business hours where they're never going to be able to make those classes. You need to make things at times where people can get to. Because if you're already barely making ends meet, you're not going to quit a job to take a leap and get new training, not knowing when that next job is going to come. So we need to make it easier for people to do that.
Just one quick follow-up question.
Please.
Where do you stand on $15 minimum wage?
I support an increase in the minimum wage to $15.
How do you get there? Is it gradual?
Gradually. The current bill before Congress does it by, I believe it's now 2022.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I get there, I'd say 2023, 2024, and then I would index it to inflation. So we can just put aside the debate permanently after that point. I would index it to inflation or the consumer price index.
And with that, our time is up. Alexander Chandler, candidate for Congress, thank you for coming in today.
Thank
Pleasure
you very
meeting
much for having me.
And if you missed part of this, it'll be on lowellsun.com along with the story, and people can watch it as your candidacy grows. Great. Thank you, Alex.
So
Take care.
much. Thank you.